Hello, I'm Kevin Giles, Giles-Flythe Engineers. Today I'm going to talk to you about saving money in a pandemic and how to make a decision of how to defer a capital repair project. Giles-Flythe Engineers, we've been in business since 2003. We help communities with reserve studies, transition studies, and engineering consulting from construction administration project kind of management to just general engineering inspections. But today I really want to focus on how to help you guys save some money in this pandemic and how to make decisions of how to defer projects. So we will jump right into the presentation. Your budgets this year have likely been impacted by COVID-19. Your associations are likely spending more money than budgeted on several items. In response to COVID-19, this could include pool staffing increases where you're having to do cleaning and sanitizing of the pool and needing additional staffing. This could include additional communication that's been needed, additional signs that have been needed, and likely also some additional consultations with professionals, possibly attorneys, to help with deciding how to open pools or other things that you may be dealing with as well. And then on the income side of your budget, you may have also seen some delinquencies increase where you're not receiving as much money. So today's goal is just to give you a couple tools for how to make decisions on deferring projects and what the impact of deferring projects can be towards your reserve account and find some ways to save some money in this year's budget. So when we work with communities, we basically set up a couple different models of how we decide how to defer projects. One of the questions we get most frequently is, we're using a lot of these common areas less right now. The playground has been closed, the clubhouse has been closed. Can we assume that we're going to get a longer life out of these components? And the answer to that is it kind of depends. For playground equipment, not really. Playground equipment wear and tear is more based on outdoor exposure, exposure to the sun, exposure to the elements. It's what's primary driver to most of your outdoor components, playground equipment, parking lots, exterior buildings. All of this is predominantly driven by just exposure to the weather. Now, the interior of your buildings, if you have clubhouses with carpeted areas or kitchens or that type of thing, yes, some of those components are likely getting a lot less wear, probably using those components less. So those could possibly be get a longer life out of it since there's less use on them. But most of the stuff is not going to be impacted with a longer life from just the pandemic or less use during the pandemic. So when we set up, when we're working with communities, one of the common questions that we get is how severe are the problems? Can you help us prioritize repairs? We're looking at all these different projects that we need to do. How do you decide which one's most important, which one's the least important? How do you defer those projects? How do you decide which projects you can put off and which ones you can't? And we basically, in our firm as engineers, break this down into really 5 different levels where we're looking at the different levels of what the concerns are to help us decide on a priority level of which projects, which capital repair projects absolutely have to be done versus which ones can wait several more years. I've listed out those basic descriptions of those priority levels here, and I'll elaborate on each one. We'll also show some pictures of some examples of each one to kind of get you an idea of what we're looking at when we're making these decisions. So number 1 is the imminent safety concerns, immediate safety problems. So this would be major problems with decks where they're almost going to fall down, or stairs, exterior stairs that are almost falling down, or possibly water leaks that are resulting in mold growth or even electrical hazards. Some of the most common one is typically, though, with exterior decks, exterior walkways, places where people could actively get hurt if this thing was to collapse or it's near collapsing. Imminent safety problems should never be deferred. Those should be repaired immediately. As engineers, we generally have a duty to inform the public if we see imminent safety concerns where there's an imminent problem with some components in a community. We generally have a duty to inform of those components. That's your number 1 priority list. That's the number 1 priority item. Those should never be deferred. Second on the list would be what we would kind of bucket into the compliance with code requirements. This would be elevator inspections, annual elevator inspections, whatever you need to do to make sure that elevator is passing its inspection. Same thing with fire suppression or fire alarm equipment. Whatever you need to be doing to get those fire annual inspections passed, those would be a priority level. This could also be stormwater ponds. If your ponds are failing inspections, you need to get the ponds corrected. This could also be accessibility issue, or what's commonly known as ADA for the American with Disabilities Act. This is one of those things. If you have a compliance issue with those things, it's something that should definitely be high on the priority list. And then possibly swimming pool opening. However, pool opening could also fall down as a lower component depending on the severity of the budget's concerns. We've worked with plenty of communities that have deferred opening swimming pools for a year just out of budget concerns as well. So that second kind of priority list is compliance with any code requirements for particular things that the associations are responsible for. So moving further down the list of how we decide to defer a project or not to defer a project or decide that priority level, this is where it gets a little more grays in the next two items. We kind of define the third level of priority as an imminent further damage. So if we don't fix this component, if we don't repair this component, there's going to be imminent further damage to the building, to the property. So maybe this is siding and caulking that are deteriorating and rotting and beginning to let a little bit of water inside the building or inside the components, or starting then a problem where you are going to be causing long-term rot, long-term wear, and those components can be more rapid. So that imminent further damage. Possibly the roof is in really poor condition. I've got a couple loose shingles. I'm losing a couple shingles. It's likely that water will start infiltrating if I don't repair these problems in the near term. There's more of an imminent further damage. I'm going to cause more problems if I don't fix this in the near term. The next line item is a little less severe, but there's certainly some concerns there. So this would be, there's likely further deterioration. This would be more like flaking paint. So the siding's not rotting, the caulking's doing okay, but I do have some flaking paint starting. This could also be cracks in asphalt paving, where you're getting some cracks or some minor potholes developing in asphalt paving. Yes, it's going to continue to deteriorate. Yes, it's a problem, but the deterioration is going to be on a longer term. It's not something more imminent further damage. It's going to be more longer term stuff. And yes, ideally, all of these first four items, and really all five of them, are something that you would have funds for in your budget to repair immediately. However, when deciding, making those tough decisions about what you can put off, these are this is the order of that priority. Finally, the fifth one, what we would call the least important or lowest on the priority list of repairs, would be any aesthetic work that you're doing. This would be interior clubhouse work, replacing carpets, painting the interior of the clubhouse, replacing furniture, landscape lighting systems, landscape irrigation systems, entrance sign upgrades and enhancements. Those would be kind of further down the list on the aesthetics end of it. That'd be kind of your least priority. So we'll roll through a couple of examples of those items and what to look for. So this should be clearly an example of an imminent safety concern. This is a deck that is partially collapsed right outside the door going inside of a townhome unit. This is an imminent repair and should be blocked off and should not be used. This hopefully is pretty clear. This is a imminent safety concern. The same thing with this next slide is more imminent safety concerns with decks. These decks are about to collapse. You only have, if you look at that picture on the left, there's only about a 1-inch area of bearing where that girder is just barely resting on that 4x4 post. This is an imminent concern. If this had more than a handful of people on it, the possibility, it would likely collapse. It would likely be significant injury as well. So these are the kind of the clear first priority imminent safety concerns. This is just showing you a couple of inspection stickers for elevators, and then fire extinguishers. Again, this is just more of the compliance with code requirements, making sure that you're keeping your components in compliance with any annual inspections or code compliance. So this is, we're going to get into this gray area a little bit. So this is an example of a pretty big hole in some siding that has developed a pretty significant rot. Water is actively going inside that unit. It's rolling off that gutter that you see and rolling inside that T111 siding where that hole is developed in that siding. This is what we would call imminent further damage. So we are continuing to damage the siding. We are also continuing to damage the structural framing inside this unit. Maybe an imminent safety issue. If there's an active water leak going inside this unit and there's mold developing, this would be bumped up on the priority. But just looking at it from the outside, it's likely just that priority level 3, imminent further damage. This needs to be fixed in the near term to prevent additional damage. This is another example where there's some more rot directly below a window. There's enough rot here where we have lost components of that piece of trim. There's water actively seeping into this area and causing additional damage. This would be that imminent further damage at level 3 kind of priority. Should definitely be a priority item to get fixed in the near term. Not an imminent safety issue. No one's going to get hurt today if this is not fixed, but this needs to be addressed in the near term. Moving along, this is where we're getting a little more into kind of that further deterioration, likely that level 4 of priority list. Roof shingles are in really poor condition. It looks like there's a previous patchwork on this roof. There's a lot of debris on the roof, but does this roof really need to be replaced today? It kind of depends on your funding situation. If you're well funded and have enough funds to cover it, then yeah, it'd be smart to replace this roof today. However, it's not meeting those other kind of definitions of the priority levels. It's not actively leaking. We don't have any imminent safety concerns that we would be worried about. And then moving further down to aesthetics, this is, I think, a 1983 clubhouse, and it doesn't look like anything has happened since 1983. We have all the original countertops, all the original cabinets. Yes, it looks old. Yes, it looks worn out, but this is all aesthetic stuff. So this is going to be further down on that priority list. And this is just more of a couple fun pictures of the interior of the clubhouse for this particular community. Somewhat dated furniture and that type of thing. But again, further down on aesthetics. So again, deferring a project, what can we defer, how to make the decision, basically 5 buckets. Immediate safety concern is priority number 1, moving down with compliance with any code requirements, and then kind of moving into how severe is the likelihood of imminent further damage if we don't fix it, and then finally going into aesthetics. So what happens if we defer? I'm going to run through a couple spreadsheets very briefly. This is a community we work for, has $40,000 they're putting into the reserve account each year. You look at that second column, we're recommending increasing by $5,000 each year, and they have all these repair expenses. They're staying in a positive balance over the 20 years. They're ending at $81,000, staying in good shape. So what if we took the repair expenses and we made them all 0 for 2020 through 2024, and then we also converted that $40,000 contribution to 0 in 2020. So this freed up $40,000 into their budget, and they were able to put off a couple of expenses. You can see they stayed in the positive through the entire term by doing those things and maintained kind of a minimum balance at the end of that term. Basically, it depends on your community. If your community is well funded, you can likely follow a similar scenario where you put off a couple projects, maybe eliminate or reduce this year's reserve contribution to find some extra money. But I would recommend consulting with your reserve study provider to get a feel for if that is an option for your particular community. There's a lot of things that go into these reserve studies and where the different capital projects fall. But for this community, just looking at it as an example, yes, it seemed to work. We were able to eliminate that 2020 reserve contribution, so that freed up $40,000 in their budget. We deferred 4 years worth of projects out to basically $60,000 worth of projects out to 2024, and we still stayed with a positive balance at the end of the term. We still have enough funds to cover those major projects at the end of the term for this particular community. So a couple other things that we look at when helping communities find a little extra money this year. Deferring repair projects can have an impact. It's not going to be as substantial as other areas unless you're deferring a substantial amount of work. You can possibly reduce or eliminate reserve contributions this year, assuming you are following a plan, assuming you are well funded. It's likely one of your better sources of funds. It's very similar to just borrowing from reserves. It's basically the same concept. Instead of making those reserve transfers, you're just going to hold it in your operating account to kind of fund some of those budget constraints. Certainly recommend consulting with CPA and attorney just to make sure that there's nothing in your governing documents that's going to prevent you from doing that. And then also consulting with your reserve study provider to confirm the impact long-term and what that would look like. You're certainly going to want to recover from this. You certainly would not be able to do a reduction in your reserve contribution for multiple years in a row. This would have to be a one-time type thing to maintain a decent balance. And certainly worth consulting with your reserve study provider to confirm it. Seen plenty of communities borrow from reserves to help fund operating in a pinch. It is certainly an option. It's very similar in principle to reducing a contribution for 1 year. Then finally, loans for capital projects. There are plenty of bankers out there that are willing to and work with communities that can provide loans for various capital repair projects. That is certainly an option to find a little extra money and kind of reduce that budget constraint that you may be experiencing with your communities through this pandemic. I know we've moved through a bunch of slides pretty quickly. Really just goal is to help provide some tips and some tools on how to save a little bit of money, how you can defer a capital repair project, and how we make that decision when we're approached with how should we be deferring a capital repair project? What is the priority level? Which items should be done first? Which ones can be put off till later? Hopefully I've provided some tools and some guidance for you to help make that decision. And then looking at what the impact was to reserves. My contact information is on the screen. Feel free to reach out at any time. I'm happy to discuss any of these items with you at any time. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to present in this series. Again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. And again, it's Kevin Giles, Giles-Flythe Engineers. Thank you.